And let's listen. Mohamed Adao, he's the director of Power Shift Africa, and he said this is the worst COP in recent memory, and for him, the draft proposal is unacceptable.
Our expectation was low, but this is a slap in the face. This is not something any developing country will fall for. We needed an ambitious climate finance goal that meets the needs of the developing country, and what they're offering us is a fifth of what developing countries have asked for. Will we settle for a fifth of the ambition that developing countries can provide? Of course not. And so there's no way this is going to be accepted by anyone.
And for more on this, we have with us Tony Tiyu from the Renewable Energy Specialist. He's the founder and CEO of Renewables in Africa. So Tony, you heard the director saying that the draft is a slap in the face. Your reaction?
Well, I think I would agree with him, right? Because this COP, it was meant to be the COP for finance and highlight the urgent need to transform global climate finance. You have vulnerable nations that were pushing for a new collective target, from the 100 billion that was actually running out by 2025 to 1.3 trillion, to address mitigation, adaptation, loss and damages. And what they're offering the developed nation is 250, which is just 1/5 of what is considered. Clearly, you can understand why people would consider that clearly unacceptable.
So countries vulnerable to climate change are asking $1.3 trillion per year. So how did we come up with this figure? I mean, what is, as far as African countries are concerned, what's for them?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. I can say that is actually worked out by people much more clever than me, so economists. And it's a complicated approach that would take into account scientific modeling, economic analysis, and also principle of climate justice. So we look at, for example, items like impact assessment. You want to quantify the economic losses from climate change in developing nations. You want to estimate the cost of extreme weather events, agricultural disruption, and infrastructure damages. And there's many other things that obviously come into that. You will look at, for example, also the adaptation cost calculation, where you want to determine the investment needed to make those critical systems resilient, and how can we move those economy from a fossil fuel base to clean energy base, and also what is the level of historical responsibility. You package all of that to come up with a 1.3 trillion. So that's what I could say regarding that figure.
So the negotiations are still ongoing in Baku. Do you know about the latest? What have you been hearing?
Oh, I think I could, like you could see in your previous report. So at the moment, there's no deal, right? So we need to have further conversations to move to hopefully a consensus. So I'm hearing that the new text could be talking about a higher amount than $250 billion per year, but recognizing what is actually needed is 1.3 trillion. And I know as well that developed nations, what they would like to see is to have a much bigger contributor base. They don't want to have the same few paying for that amount, which is obviously debatable. But they want to obviously invite people like China and India to make voluntary participation, which those countries at the moment say strictly no.
So the first COP was almost 30 years ago. Since then, there's one everywhere. We all remember the Paris Agreement that covered, you mentioned, climate change, mitigation, adaptation, and finance. So many COPs, are they still relevant?
That's an excellent question. That actually reminds me that I published an article like that on LinkedIn recently, and a friend of mine reacted to that and say, what are we waiting for? Are we waiting for COP 100? Why can't we solve the problem right now? But I would still argue that COP remain essential, right, for Africa to unify its voice and advocate for equitable climate solution. In fact, at COP, this is where you have global policy that are shaped, and Africa participation is needed to ensure that the needs are considered. But what we really need for those COP, and I think I would agree with everybody there, the sentiment, is that we need to be obviously translating those discussions into tangible outcome. So the focus must shift to accountability and implementation to ensure that the conferences really deliver results for vulnerable nations, because they are the ones suffering.
Thank you, Tony Tiyu, CEO of Renewables in Africa. Thank you very much for analysis. Now let's turn to Uganda. Opposition